Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music. With me, your retro savant, the man you need in a pub quiz about 80s bass players, the 80s mixtaper. Hope everyone's week is going well so far. For anyone new to the pod, back in 2016 I set upon the task of trying to listen to every single UK charting entry for the entire 80s decade. So from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989. And by 2021, I'd completed the mission. Thousands of singles. This podcast is the story of that journey, and more specifically, the story of one of the greatest decades in music. Each week, we inch the calendar slowly forward, create a playlist of 13 songs, and break that playlist into 2 episodes. We talk about the themes, the bands, the history, the social and economic impact, and pick out the best, most interesting, and most bonkers songs that the time period has to offer. And it's everything. We don't take ourselves too seriously here, so whether you're here for Star Trekking or heaven knows I'm miserable now, we have you covered. Unfortunately, due to copyright laws, we cannot play the songs on the pod, but fear not, if you go into the episode description, you will find playlist links for both Spotify and Apple Music, plus a full track listing if those links don't work on your pod platform of choice. I think most people just flick between the pod and Spotify when they hear the mystical, shimmery noise appear, but I also know one listener who listens to the pod episode and then listens to that half of the playlist, whatever takes your fancy. As you know, we also love your comments, corrections and recollections on this pod, and this week we had a fantastic outpouring of love for a really minor hit, and it always seems to be the niche stuff which causes this. If I post on the socials about Queen or Duran Duran, it's always pretty quiet. But in this case, posting about Lena Lovitch and her song New Toy went sort of semi-viral. It picked up 12,000 views and we had some lovely comments about the song. Vin and Fashion said, half-heartedly imitated, never matched or replaced. Joseph Fahy, 43, said, I was dancing to this in New York City in 1979. Ord Fish said the charts meant nothing for new wave music, and Chooch highlights the fact that she was a professional screamer in Hollywood. Wombat said Thomas Dolby is on the keyboard, and then Fenta Fauna has weighed in and said yep, he wrote the song for her too. It's so lovely to see these little snippets about these artists so many years after the fact. I think the thing that sort of horrifies me most about the 80s now is that they were so long ago, and you see it particularly in hashtags of all things. So if you type in something like hashtag David Bowie on Insta, it's currently running at 3,067,000 instances. And that's because Bowie has a global ubiquity to him, of course he does. Now, of course, you wouldn't expect someone like Lena Lovitch to have those sorts of numbers. But if we type her in, it's only 7,833. So in all the time that Instagram has existed and someone has thought to post about this brilliant artist, it's only occurred on less than 8,000 occasions. And it's so alarming how many iconic figures this applies to as well. Just one more fantastic example, Godley and Cream. Hitmakers with 10cc and then their own stuff, and they are also responsible for some of the biggest videos of the 1980s. So these guys were tastemakers. 2,751 posts. That just seems fucking criminal that they are that underappreciated and represented. So it's comments like these on Lena that I absolutely love on the pod. Just little snippets, and it's so important to keep those memories alive. If you'd like to get in touch with the pod, you can find me on all socials as the 80s Mixtaper. That's 80s Mixtaper. Or if you're old school like me, you can actually email in to completed80s@aol.com. And again, that's completed80s@aol.com. So folks, we've reached the last full playlist of 1981 as we hit December. Playlist 33, and this one is an absolute stonker. Both parts are, but in the first half alone, we get the Christmas number 1. We get 2 very personal memories for me from a Bucks Fizz and also a Madness track. Duran Duran surprise in a very retro way. Plus we also hear from Status Quo, Sheena Easton and Gary Numan. So let's not stand on ceremony. Let's get back to the music. First up today, and it's a song that really takes me back. It's a song about me as a 3-year-old, or any 3-year-old, full of wonder, willing to believe any fantasy. My sister had this next band's album, and this was always my favourite song. Of course it was my favourite song, as I've said, it was about me. Run for the sun, little one, you're an outlaw once again. Time to change, Superman will be with us while he can. This is a true 80s song in my heart. I digress. When we last left Bucks Fizz, they were navigating the precarious post-Eurovision landscape. Their Eurovision winner, Making Your Mind Up, had been a global juggernaut, selling 4 million copies worldwide. But the follow-ups were showing signs of diminishing returns. Piece of the Action, which we heard in episode 25, reached a respectable number 12, becoming the highest charting follow-up for any Eurovision act at the time. However, the next single, One of Those Nights, stalled at number 20. Producer Andy Hill knew the group's shelf life was ticking. They needed to pivot from the retro rock and roll cheese of Dublin to something more polished and frankly stranger. Hill sought out an unlikely collaborator, Peter Sinfield. This was a man whose resume included founding King Crimson and writing the lyrics for prog rock opuses like 21st Century Schizoid Man. Sinfield had been living in tax exile in Ibiza, and upon his return to London in 1980, he found the prog world he'd helped build largely extinct. He noted that writing a 3-minute pop hit with a veneer of integrity was 10 times harder than writing for King Crimson. Together, they crafted a song that would become the group's biggest UK seller, outselling even their Eurovision winner. This is The Land of Make Believe, track 1, playlist 33. We're back. The Land of Make Believe hit number 1 in January 1982, eventually knocking the Human League's Don't You Want Me off the top spot. It stayed there for 2 weeks and spent a total of 16 weeks on the UK charts. While it sounds like a Dayglow nursery rhyme, Sinfield later revealed the lyrics were strangely enough a subtle attack on Margaret Thatcher and her government's policies. He claimed the Prime Minister was leading the British people into a dark and frightening fantasy of the past. When you look at the upbeat production, lines like something nasty in your garden's waiting till it can have your heart take on a much grimmer tone. The track is famous for its eerie ending, a nursery rhyme narrated by 11-year-old Abby Kimber, the daughter of RCA Records executive Bill Kimber. Abby would later join Mini Pops, a group of child performers that became controversial for their adult-style performances. The music video, filmed at White City swimming baths, leaned into this surrealism by paying homage to The Wizard of Oz, Cinderella, and The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Jay Aston, who chose the group's outfits from shops like Khan and Bell and Boy, later remarked that their cone boob costumes were 10 years ahead of Madonna. Despite its complexity, group member Mike Nolan initially told Hill he thought the song was a dud that would sink the band. He later admitted he was totally wrong as the song topped charts in Ireland, the Netherlands and Belgium. It even caught the ear of a certain future Eurovision winner called Celine Dion, who recorded a French version titled A Quatre Pas d'ici in 1983. The single was part of a sharp pivot for Bucks Fizz into contemporary pop, away from their Eurovision roots. It appeared on their second album, Are You Ready?, released in 1982. Critics have called it one of the weirdest number ones of the 80s, a psych pop oddity in disguise. Bucks Fizz themselves, professional as ever, brought it to life with their harmonies, but it's Sinfield's prog edge that makes it stand out. This hit marked the peak of their early success, leading into another number 1 with My Camera Never Lies later that year, which we'll hear on this pod. But for now, The Land of Make Believe captures that moment when Bucks Fizz transcended novelty status, blending fantasy with a hint of bite. For track 2, we travel back to 1980 briefly, and Status Quo is currently an immovable object in the British cultural firmament. They've just released Just Supposing, an album that features the nervous staccato energy of What You're Proposing. They are the Frantic Four: Francis Rossi, Rick Parfitt, Anna Lancaster and John Coughlin, and they have spent the last decade perfecting a boogie rock formula so reliable it feels like a utility at this point. But under the denim, the foundation is cracking. The band is recording in Dublin at Windmill Lane Studios, working at a relentless pace that will eventually yield 2 albums from the same sessions. 1980's Just Supposing and 1981's Never Too Late. It's during this stay in Ireland that Rossi and his writing partner Bernie Frost sit down and write a song that feels different. It isn't a heads down 12-bar shuffle. It's a ballad. It's vulnerable. It's a song about the road and the toll it takes. And unusually, it was never actually intended for status quo. The song is rock and roll. Press play now. The band didn't rush rock and roll as a single. Following the AA side Lies and Don't Drive My Car on November the 28th, 1980, which hit number 11 in the UK, they turned to Never Too Late for Something About You Baby I Like, a cover that reached number 9 in March 1981. Only then, on November the 20th, 1981, did an edited version of Rock and Roll emerge as a single, climbing to number 8 on the UK chart. Rock and Roll was the second single from the Just Supposing album, though it didn't actually hit the shelves until as late as that, over a year after the album's release. By the time it peaked at number 8 on the UK charts, the band was already moving on to their next era, but Rock and Roll serves as the final sombre statement of the classic lineup. The story of this song is one of transition and eventual fracture. While Quo was famous for high-energy anthems like Rockin' All Over the World, this track was a Rossi Frost composition written in a more contemplative vein. It was a valid musical entity, as some critics put it, proving they could do more than just feel-good bop. As described on TV Tropes, it's a surprisingly gentle song with ironic titling given its mellow vibe. The lyrics ponder life's twists, with lines like, "Never thought I'd have babies, now they're nearly grown," set against acoustic strums and harmonised vocals. However, the cohesion of the frantic four was ending. During the same 1980 to 81 period, tensions peaked. John Coughlin, the drummer who had been there since the early 60s, famously walked out during the sessions for the next album, 1+9+8+2. He reportedly sat behind his kit, tapped around, and then kicked the whole thing apart and left the band for good. By the time the band celebrated their 20th anniversary in 1982, the lineup had changed. Pete Kircher was on drums and keyboardist Andy Bone, who had been a guest for years, was finally an official member. They celebrated this milestone with a landmark charity show for the Prince's Trust at the NEC in Birmingham, performed in front of Prince Charles. It was the first time a contemporary rock band had played for royalty. Rock and roll remains a staple, later reimagined in an acoustic style for the 2014 Aquostic project. But its 1981 release stands as a memorial to a version of status quo that was about to disappear. For track 3, we need to talk about Duran Duran and a seminal moment. Well, one which is a few months away to be precise. On the 10th of May 1982, Duran Duran would release an album, Rio. If you've never heard it, go download it now. I will wait. It's that good. Rio is probably in the top 50 albums ever, and easily in the top 5 for the 80s. It also features the quite brilliant singles, Rio, Hungry Like the Wolf, and Save a Prayer. It also features a cult favourite called The Chauffeur, which has been covered by everyone up to and including the Deftones. So with all these incredible tunes, why did they release this next song? Well, we've just heard the girls on film, we've seen the mud wrestling videos, the controversy, and the moment where 5 guys from Birmingham realised that a provocative music video could turn a minor chart scuffle into a global occupation. It's late 1981, the self-titled debut album has peaked at number 3. The band is effectively the face of the new romantic movement they've already started to outgrow. But the gears of the music industry in the 80s don't just turn, they grind. You don't get to rest on your laurels. You need a bridge, you need a stopgap to keep the momentum humming while you figure out how to make an album that sounds like a tropical sunset and a high-speed car chase at the same time. That bridge is a song that would eventually become a ghost in their own machine. It's a song the band would later treat like a youthful indiscretion they'd rather you forgot, even as it hit the top 20 in the UK and the top 10 in Australia. It's fast, it's frantic. This is My Own Way. Press play now. My Own Way was recorded in October 1981 at Townhouse Studios in London with producer Colin Thurston. At this point, the band is under immense pressure to deliver a hit. Nick Rhodes later recalled it as the only time they actually sat down with the explicit goal of writing a hit single. Notably, this was before work began in earnest on their second LP, Rio. Released on November the 16th, 1981, the single version is a high-speed new wave disco hybrid. It features prominent string arrangements by Richard Myhill, which some critics felt dominated the track, forcing Andy Taylor's guitar to fight the strings tooth and nail. The 12-inch night version was created by physically splicing the tape to extend the backing track. Sampling technology didn't yet exist, and they added fresh overdubs. The sleeve, designed by Peter Saville and Malcolm Garrett, featured a Matador graphic that would eventually be replaced by the iconic blue logo on later pressings. The video, directed by Russell Mulcahy, was shot on 35mm film in St John's Wood Studio, decorated in a strict palette of red, black and white. It's a chaotic performance piece featuring flamenco dancers and a parrot perched on the keyboards. Despite its visual flair, it was rarely played on MTV and was omitted from major video compilations like Decade and Greatest. The band's relationship with the song is complicated. Simon Le Bon has admitted he feels the chorus never quite fulfills the promise of the verse. By the time they recorded the Rio album in early 1982 at Air Studios, they radically reworked it, and by the way, the album version I think is far superior to this 1970s throwback. They slowed the tempo, removed the disco strings, added jagged guitar runs, and included Le Bon shouting out to New York City landmarks. Drummer Roger Taylor explicitly stated his preference for this slower groove over the frantic single version. My Own Way occupies a curious spot in the Duran Duran story. While it wasn't a chart-topping smash, it bridged the gap between their debut and the Rio era, showing the band experimenting with dance and pop elements before locking in their signature sound. The fact that it's been largely absent from their live sets and greatest hit compilations speaks to its divisive reputation among both fans and the group themselves. While it served its purpose as a bridge to Rio, My Own Way remains an outlier, a hit single the band eventually relegated to the sidelines. And it turned out they didn't need it, as we shall see. Next up, we're back with a person I declared the best solo artist for 1980, especially for her contribution for the moment where the 80s could be declared as the 80s, Sheena Easton. In 1981, Sheena Easton was the centre of a pop culture supernova. She wasn't just a singer, she was a case study in the brand new medium of the multi-platform star. She had the BBC documentary The Big Time fueling her narrative, a #1 hit with Morning Train, and she'd just become the only artist ever to perform a James Bond theme on screen during the opening credits for Your Eyes Only. She was the 1981 Grammy winner for Best New Artist, a Scottish girl from Bells Hill who had conquered America before she'd even turned 23. But pop music is a treadmill, and by late 81 it was time for the difficult second album, though in Sheena's case it felt more like a victory lap that couldn't quite maintain the pace. Let's rewind just a bit to the single that followed. It's a song that captures both the promise and the poignancy of her rapid rise. You Could Have Been With Me. This is track 4, playlist 33. We return to find Sheena in the transition from fresh-faced reality star to established adult contemporary staple. You Could Have Been With Me, released in September 1981, was the title track off her second LP. It was written by Liam Malfred, a New Zealand musician who had moved to London at the behest of Elton John. Malfred's demo caught the ear of producer Christopher Neal, who had guided Easton's debut. The song is a polished, mid-tempo lament about misconnections, peaking at number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100. Critically, the song drew praise for Easton's emotive vocals and the polished, radio-friendly production. The lyrics, tinged with regret and what-ifs, struck a chord with listeners who'd followed her meteoric ascent. Yet, despite its success, You Could Have Been With Me didn't generate the same excitement as her debut singles or her Bond theme. While it was a top 20 in the US, the song signalled the beginning of a divergence in her career. In the UK, it stalled only at number 54, a sharp drop from her debut year where she'd had 2 singles in the top 10 simultaneously. And in some ways, that was all she wrote, except for some big moments with the likes of Prince and a few other songs. Why was she never able to recapture the specific glory of 1980? The reality is that 1980 was an anomaly of exposure. The Big Time documentary provided a level of organic promotion that no marketing budget could replicate. Once the Cinderella narrative wore off, Easton was left with the pure pop image that she eventually found restrictive. Critics were often unkind, labelling her early work as overly processed, the same polished production that won over adult contemporary radio, which then alienated the burgeoning MTV generation. Furthermore, Easton's career became a series of stylistic pivots rather than a steady climb. She moved to the US in 1981, essentially abandoning her home market to chase a more diverse sound. Country duets with Kenny Rogers, Spanish language records with Luis Miguel, and eventually the Sugar Walls era with Prince. While this versatility made her the only artist to have top 5 hits in 5 different Billboard charts, it arguably prevented her from maintaining a singular, dominant pop identity. By the late 1980s, she had consciously stepped away from the craziness of the pop cycle to focus on Broadway and motherhood. As she noted in recent interviews, she preferred the quote-unquote grounded life of a Las Vegas residency and raising her children, Jake and Skylar, over the rinse and repeat cycle of the charts. Let's get back to some more of the Gary Numan story. It's 1981, and Gary Numan, the man who made Android a viable career path, had just retired of all things. Except, of course, he hasn't. He's just finished 3 sold-out nights at Wembley Arena. But while the dry ice is still settling, his band is already moving on. This brings us to Dramatis. If you've seen Numan live between 79 and 81, you've seen these guys. They are the machine music vanguard. Chris Payne on keyboards and viola, Russell Bell on guitar, Dennis Haynes on keys, and the powerhouse Cedric Sharpley on drums. When Gary announced he was stepping away from the stage, these 4 musicians didn't head for the unemployment line. They formed their own synth-pop outfit and signed to Elton John's Rocket Record Company. They were virtuosos in a genre often accused of being press play, but they had one minor problem. They didn't have a marquee lead singer. They were recording their debut album for future reference at Ridge Farm Studios when their old boss dropped by for a visit. They played him a track they'd been working on, a percussive, sparse piece about life on the road. Gary loved it. He loved it so much he asked if he could sing on it. The result is a song that feels like a bridge between his previous work and the funk-infused experimentation Gary was about to dive into on his album Dance. This is Love Needs No Disguise. Track 5, press play now. Love Needs No Disguise was released on November the 27th, 1981. It's a fascinating artefact because it's technically a Dramatis song featuring Gary Numan, but Beggars Banquet, Numan's label, knew exactly what they had and shared the release. The track entered the UK singles chart on December the 5th, 1981, eventually peaking at number 33. Musically, it's barer than the lush, moog-heavy anthems Numan fans were used to. It features Chris Payne's distinctive viola and a hypnotic, almost tribal drum pattern from Cedric Sharpley. Lyrically, it's a rare moment of Numan voicing Dramatis' words sounding vulnerable, or at least as vulnerable as a man in a fedora and a heavy white face paint can sound. The video is pure 1981 transition. Gary has ditched the black jumpsuit for a 1930s gangster aesthetic, a look inspired by eccentric millionaire Howard Hughes, complete with a fedora that would define his next few years. While Dramatis' album For Future Reference didn't set the charts on fire, failing to reach the top 100, the band remains a crucial part of the synth-pop history. Chris Payne co-wrote Fade to Grey for Visage, and Cedric Sharpley would eventually rejoin Numan's touring band when he inevitably realised that retirement was a terrible fit for him. Despite their pedigree, the band remained somewhat in the shadows, perhaps overshadowed by Numan's towering presence in the genre. This song stands as the high watermark of their independence, a top 40 hit that proved the Numanoids were willing to follow the sound, even when the Big G was technically just the guest of honour. For our next song, I must take you back to a specific memory of mine, not from the 80s, but from the 90s. November 1994 to be precise. Yours truly was a spotty-faced 16-year-old at the time, and a close acquaintance of me and my friends had rather naively, perhaps in a bid for popularity, offered to host a house party in the disused basement apartment of his father's doctor's surgery in a nice suburb of York. I can still remember walking to that party, full of anticipation, with a 4-pack of John Smith's Bitter in a carrier bag by my side, purchased by my dad because how much trouble can I really get into on 4 beers? I walked with my mates, singing Cigarettes and Alcohol by Oasis. When we reached the party, well, let's just say it went down as a legendary night, never to be recaptured or repeated despite trying. It was endless, and at one point towards the early hours of Saturday morning, myself and a friend got the munchies and decided to up sticks and walk into the nearby takeaways to obtain bacon sandwiches. On the way, we passed the dorm rooms of a very exclusive girls' school, and standing at the windows were 2 pretty women whom I can presume were of a similar age. Far be it from me to pass up an opportunity to woo said beautiful upper-class debutantes, and so in my best crooner voice, I proceeded to sing as best I could the only love song I really cared about. A song I loved as much as the band who sang it. That song, ladies and gentlemen, was It Must Be Love by Madness. And, to the 2 female students in their pyjamas credit, they stood and listened as me and my friend belted out this classic. And wouldn't it be a fitting end to the story to say that one of those young women is now my wife of 20 years and we're happily married with 2 kids? Well, that would be a lie. The 2 young women giggled, waved at us, and then disappeared. I think about them often, even though it's 32 years ago. What I can tell you was that the bacon sandwich we bought at the cafe was delicious. This is track 6. Madness had been playing It Must Be Love as an encore during their 1981 tour. Keyboardist Mike Barson was a fan of the original and had introduced it to the group. The band wasn't initially looking to release a cover, but Stiff Records boss Dave Robinson heard them playing it and was convinced it was a smash hit. While many associate it entirely with Madness, it's actually a cover of a 1971 soulful pop song by British singer-songwriter Labi Siffre. Siffre's original reached number 14 in the UK. The Madness version surpassed it, peaking at number 4. The story of how this recording happened is legendary within the band's history. Dave Robinson was so adamant about the song's potential that he reportedly made a bet with the band. If It Must Be Love didn't reach the top 5, they could have his entire record company, Stiff Records. The band took the bet, and luckily for Robinson, the song landed right at number 4. Musically, the track marked a shift as well. Producers Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley added a roots reggae slant and utilised real strings playing pizzicato, a plink-plink sound that was a significant experiment at the time. This technique was so effective that producer Trevor Horn later admitted to nicking the idea for the first ABC record. The music video is equally famous, featuring the band at a funeral and also in black gear on a white soundstage. It's an absolute classic. Remember to do the arm actions at the end of the love, love, da-da bit. There's also people in bees and birds costumes, a Dracula, and famously playing instruments underwater. Guitarist Chris Foreman later recalled that the rented guitar got so damaged it had to be dried with a hairdryer, but it was so bent they eventually had to buy it. Most notably, Labi Siffre himself makes a cameo appearance as one of the violin players, giving the cover his full blessing. Madness have many great songs, but It Must Be Love to this day remains a staple of British pop radio and is often cited as one of Madness's signature songs. Its enduring appeal has led to various re-releases, including a reissue in 1992 that charted again at number 6 in the UK, proving its lasting popularity. The song has featured in numerous adverts, most notably a long-running campaign for Love Film in the 2000s, as well as appearances in films like Shaun of the Dead and The Tall Guy, cementing its place in pop culture. Many artists have covered or performed the song, but none have matched the commercial success or cultural resonance of the Madness version. The band themselves have performed it at every major concert since its release, and I have witnessed this myself during their 40th tour in 2019. And it continues to elicit sing-alongs from audiences of all ages, sometimes by adolescent males pining after the affections of adolescent females in a dorm room in York. We end today with a song which will become the Christmas number one for 1981, though there's very little which is festive about it. When we last left the Human League, they were ascending. It was October 1981, and their single Open Your Heart had just peaked at number 6. The Sheffield Pioneers were finally reaping the rewards of a massive gamble. Just a year earlier, the original lineup had imploded, with founding members Martin Ware and Ian Craig Marsh leaving to form Heaven 17, but we've covered that several times already. But 1981 was the year of the synthesizer breakthrough. While Depeche Mode was finding their feet and OMD was crafting melodic architecture and morality, Phil Oakey had recruited 2 teenagers, Susan Ann Sully and Joanne Catherall. By late 1981, the resulting album Dare was already a critical and commercial darling. But there was one track left, a track the band didn't even want to release. Thank God they did. This is Don't You Want Me, track 7, our final song today. Don't You Want Me was released on November the 27th, 1981 as the 4th single from Dare. It wasn't Oakey's choice, it was Simon Draper at Virgin Records who insisted on it. Oakey was so convinced it was a filler track and a rip-off for fans who already owned the album that he famously relegated it to the very last spot on the second side of the LP. He even demanded the label include a large colour poster with the single just to ensure that fans felt that they were getting their money's worth. The song's origins are strictly professional. Oakey wrote the lyrics after reading a photo story in a girl's teen magazine. Inspired by the 1976 version of A Star Is Born, he transformed what was originally a male solo into a duet. Susan Ann Sully, who had only been doing backing vocals, was chosen as the female lead by luck of the draw. Technically, the track was revolutionary. It was the first number one hit to feature the Linn LM1, the first programmable drum machine to use samples of real drums. Producer Martin Rushent famously clashed with Oakey over the track's sound. Oakey hated the poppy remix Rushent had crafted, preferring the harsher original synthesizer parts. The public did not share Oakey's disdain. The song entered the UK charts at number 9 and quickly shot to number 1, where it stayed for 5 weeks. It became the Christmas number 1 of 1981 and the year's best-selling single in the UK, eventually moving over 1.5 million copies. The success crossed the Atlantic in 1982, fueled by a high-budget music video directed by Stephen Barron. Inspired by films like Francois Truffaut's Day for Night, the cinematic clip was a staple of the fledgling MTV. By July 1982, it topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 3 weeks, a moment Rolling Stone later identified as the breakthrough for the second British invasion. Oki eventually softened his stance, later admitting he was wrong about the track that effectively saved Virgin Records from financial trouble. Today, it remains a definitive anthem of the era, a nasty song about sexual power politics that defined the global synth-pop explosion. So, we are now halfway through playlist 33, but do join us next week as we head towards Christmas 1981 and the end of the year. We'll get the last we'll hear of the Rolling Stones for quite a while. Foreigner drop a ballad which will become synonymous with both the 80s and Grand Theft Auto Vice City in the noughties. Altered Images release a song which possibly surpasses their other hit Happy Birthday. John and Vangelis appear for the second and last time since the very first episode of this podcast. Rod Stewart releases one of my favourite Rod songs, and ABBA have one last star turn before things get really weird. As always, if you can leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Music, it's always welcome. But until next time, have a great week. Take care.